I used to believe that some people are just not meant to be loved the way they truly are. Not completely, not honestly, not without condition. I believed that for 34 years. I carried that belief like a stone in my chest, heavy, cold, always there. And for a long time I convinced myself that the weight was normal, that everyone felt it, that this was just what life felt like when you were different, when you existed in a body and a truth that the world hadn't made room for yet. My name is Ava Reyes, and I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which, if you've never been there, is a place where the sky is enormous and the silence is even bigger. It's a beautiful city in a lot of ways. Wide streets, golden sunsets, people who wave at you from their porches and mean it. But it's also a place where certain truths don't have language, where certain lives don't have space. Where you can grow up surrounded by people who love you and still feel completely, devastatingly alone. I grew up in a house with terracotta floors, and a mother who cooked enchiladas every Sunday and a father who worked double shifts at the warehouse so we could have a backyard with a rusted swing set. They were good people, hardworking, generous, full of faith. We went to church every Sunday morning without fail. My mother sang in the choir. My father shook hands with the pastor at the door every single week like it was a ritual, like it was medicine. And I loved them. God, I loved them so much it hurt. But there was something inside me that I could never bring to that house. Something I learned very early to fold up and tuck away, deep into the quietest part of myself where no one could find it. I was 9 years old the first time I felt it, that strange, confusing flutter, when my best friend Daniela held my hand during a thunderstorm and I didn't want her to let go. I was 12 when I realized what that feeling meant, and I was 14 when I understood, with a clarity that was more terrifying than comforting, that this part of me was never going to disappear no matter how hard I prayed for it to. So I did what I knew how to do. I survived. I got good grades. I went to college in state. I got a job at a healthcare clinic doing administrative work. I rented a small apartment 3 miles from my parents' house, and I visited them every Sunday, and I sat at that same kitchen table, and I ate my mother's enchiladas, and I smiled, and I answered questions about work, and I deflected questions about boyfriends with practiced ease, and I drove home alone every Sunday night and sat in my dark apartment and felt the weight of my own silence crushing me from the inside. I dated a man named Trevor for 2 years. He was kind and patient and genuinely good. He deserved someone who could love him the way he needed. I was not that person. When I ended things, he cried and asked me why, and I told him I just wasn't ready for commitment. I couldn't tell him the truth. I wasn't even sure I could say the truth out loud yet, not to anyone, not even to myself in the mirror. I was 32 when I finally admitted it, out loud. Alone in my car in the parking lot of a Walmart at 11 o'clock at night, I said it to the windshield like a confession. I'm a transgender woman, and I think I might fall in love with women. The words hung in the cold air of that car like something sacred, like something terrifying, like something I could never take back. I didn't tell anyone for another year. Actual transition, the process of becoming Ava on the outside, as well as the inside, happened slowly, privately, and mostly in secret. I found a therapist in a city 40 miles away so no one would recognize my car in the parking lot. I started hormone therapy quietly. I bought new clothes a little at a time and kept them in a box in the back of my closet. I changed my name legally on a Tuesday afternoon at the courthouse downtown, while my mother thought I was at a dentist appointment. When I finally told my parents, my mother sat very still for a very long time. My father left the room. He didn't slam the door, that would have been easier somehow. He just walked out quietly, and that quiet was the loudest thing I had ever heard in my life. My mother cried. She said she needed time. She said she loved me but she didn't understand. She said she was scared. She held my hand for a moment and then let go, and I drove home and I packed a bag and I booked a one-way ticket to Portland, Oregon, because I had read online that it was the kind of place where a person like me might be able to breathe. I didn't have a plan. I had $4,000 in savings, a rolling suitcase, a carry-on, and a desperate, fragile, terrifying hope that somewhere on the other side of the country there was a life that actually fit me. Portland in October is grey and green and cold in a way that feels honest. It doesn't pretend to be warm. It doesn't smile at you from a porch. It wraps you in clouds and rain and the smell of wet cedar, and somehow that felt more comforting to me than any amount of fall sunshine ever had. I landed at PDX on a Thursday evening with my suitcase and my fear, and I took a rideshare to the Airbnb I had booked for 2 weeks while I figured out something more permanent. The Airbnb was a small studio in a neighborhood called Alberta Arts District. Narrow streets lined with murals and coffee shops and bookstores with hand-painted signs in the windows. My studio was on the second floor of an old house converted into apartments. It had original hardwood floors, and a radiator that clicked and hissed through the night, and a window that looked out over a maple tree that had gone fully red for fall. I stood at that window my first night in Portland and I cried. Not from sadness, exactly. From something I didn't have a clean word for. Relief, maybe. Or the particular grief of someone who has finally put down something heavy and can now feel exactly how exhausted they are. I started my life methodically. I transferred my job remotely. The clinic had agreed to let me work from home as a billing coordinator. I opened a bank account at a local branch. I found a therapist named Dr. Mara Hendricks who had a small office near Powell's Books and who looked at me on our first session with the kind of steady, unshockable calm that made me feel like I could say anything without the walls caving in. I found an apartment after 11 days, a one-bedroom in a converted Victorian on Northeast Fremont Street, with tall ceilings and old windows that rattled in the wind and a clawfoot bathtub that I immediately fell in love with. The building had 6 units. My landlord was a retired schoolteacher named Gerald who wore suspenders and left fresh herbs from his garden outside your door sometimes for no reason. I moved in on a Saturday. My neighbor across the hall introduced herself that same afternoon. I had just finished dragging my second box inside when I heard a door open and footsteps, and then a voice, warm and slightly husky, the kind of voice that sounds like it belongs to someone who laughs easily. "Hey, you need help with those?" I turned around. She was standing in the hallway in paint-stained overalls and a cream-colored Henley, holding a mug of coffee in one hand. She was tall, with warm brown skin and natural hair pulled up loosely, and she had a smear of cadmium yellow paint on her left cheekbone that she clearly didn't know was there. She was looking at me with an expression of completely uncomplicated friendliness, open and easy, like offering help to a stranger was the most natural thing in the world. Her name was Jordan Ellis. And in that first moment, standing in a hallway in Portland with a cardboard box in my arms and my whole uncertain life around me, I felt something shift quietly in my chest, like a window being opened in a room that had been closed for a very long time. "I'm okay," I said, "but thank you." "I'm Jordan," she said, extending the hand that wasn't holding the coffee. "I've lived here for 2 years. Gerald's great. The radiators are loud, but you get used to it. The Thai place on the corner is incredible. And the woman in Unit 3 practices cello at odd hours, but honestly it starts to feel atmospheric after a while." I laughed, actually laughed, surprised and genuine, standing in that drafty hallway in my new city. "I'm Ava," I said. She smiled. "Welcome to Fremont Street, Ava." We became friends the way neighbors sometimes do in old buildings, gradually, naturally, through 100 small moments that seem insignificant until you look back and realize they were building something. It started with a cup of sugar, which sounds like a cliché but was genuinely how it happened. I knocked on her door 3 days after moving in because I was making tea and realized I had no sugar, and she opened the door in paint-covered jeans with music playing behind her and handed me a bowl of sugar like she'd been waiting for me to knock. She was an artist, a real one, not in the aspirational someday maybe sense, but in the actual paying her bills, selling her work sense. She painted large abstract canvases full of color and movement and feeling, and she had a studio space in a shared building on Alberta where she worked most mornings. She also taught a community painting class on Wednesday evenings at a rec center nearby, mostly for adults who had never painted before and just wanted to try something new. "You should come," she said one evening when we were sharing a bottle of wine in her apartment, surrounded by her canvases. "It's not intimidating. Nobody's trying to be Picasso. We just paint and talk, and sometimes someone accidentally gets more paint on themselves than on the canvas." "I haven't painted since 5th grade, I said. "Perfect," she said. "Then you have no bad habits to unlearn." I went the following Wednesday, and then the one after that, and the one after that. Jordan's class was held in a big bright room with long folding tables, and the particular smell of acrylic paint and old carpet that I immediately loved. There were usually 8 or 10 people. A retired firefighter named Bill who painted only mountains, a young nurse named Keisha who was working through a bad breakup one brushstroke at a time, a 60-something woman named Harriet who wore enormous earrings and painted flowers with fierce, joyful abandon. Jordan moved around the room with easy authority, stopping at each station, asking questions, offering gentle suggestions, never making anyone feel inadequate. She had a gift for seeing what someone was trying to say in their painting and helping them figure out how to say it more clearly. She was patient and perceptive and quietly funny, and watching her work made me understand something about her that the hallway had only suggested. She genuinely cared about people, not in a performed, effortful way, in a bone-deep, instinctive way. It was just who she was. I found myself looking forward to Wednesdays the way I had never looked forward to anything in Tulsa. I found myself thinking about things I wanted to tell her throughout the week, a funny thing that happened on a work call, a book I'd read, something I'd seen on my walk through the neighborhood. I found myself, for the first time in as long as I could remember, genuinely excited about my own life. We started having dinner together on Friday nights. Sometimes we cooked at one of our apartments, sometimes we went to the Thai place on the corner, sometimes we walked to a bar nearby and got drinks and stayed too long talking. We talked about everything: her family in Atlanta, my complicated Tulsa history told in careful increments, art and music, and the particular strange freedom of living far from where you came from. She knew I was trans. I had told her early, not as a confession but as information, sitting across from her at her kitchen table over pasta, saying it the way you might mention you grew up in Oklahoma or that you had a complicated relationship with your parents. Just part of who I am, offered plainly. She had received it exactly that way. No performance of acceptance, no overcorrection into forced allyship, just a nod and a question: how long have you been in Portland? That moved us seamlessly forward. That response, more than almost anything else, made me trust her. What I didn't tell her, what I was still figuring out how to hold, was that I was falling in love with her. It happened slowly and then all at once, the way these things do. I noticed it on a Sunday in November when we were at a farmer's market, and she handed me half of a warm cinnamon roll, and our fingers touched, and I felt it move through me like electricity. I noticed it the evening I came home from a difficult call with my mother who was trying, slowly, painfully trying, and Jordan heard me come up the stairs and opened her door before I even knocked and said wine or tea, without asking what was wrong. I noticed it every time she laughed at something I said, with that full, unguarded laugh that she had, that she gave freely, that made me feel like I was genuinely funny and genuinely seen. I didn't know if she felt it. I told myself probably not. She was warm with everyone, that was just Jordan. I was probably misreading warmth as something more because I was lonely and new to the city, and she was the first person who had made me feel fully comfortable in my own skin, in longer than I could remember. I said nothing. I kept it folded up inside me, and I told myself that what we had, this friendship, this easy, beautiful friendship, was more than enough, that I should be grateful, that some people went their whole lives without a friend like Jordan, and I was lucky to have her at all. I told myself that every Friday night, when I walked back across the hall to my own apartment. I told myself that every time I wanted to reach across the table and take her hand. The night everything changed was in December, a week before Christmas. We had both stayed in for the evening. Portland was deep in a cold snap, and neither of us wanted to go out, and we were in my apartment, sitting on the floor with my laptop between us watching an old movie and sharing a blanket and a bowl of popcorn because my couch was too small for two people to sit comfortably. At some point the movie ended, and neither of us moved to start another one, and the apartment was very quiet except for the radiator clicking and the wind outside and the soft sound of both of us breathing. "Can I ask you something?" Jordan said. "Of course," I said. She was quiet for a moment. I could feel her gathering herself somehow, a slight shift in her posture, a small intake of breath. "Are you happy here?" she asked. "In Portland, in this life you're building, are you actually happy?" It was such a simple question, and it hit me so unexpectedly that my eyes filled immediately. I looked down at the blanket and blinked hard. "I think this is the first time in my life I've been moving toward happy," I said. "That's the most honest answer I can give." She was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said softly, "I'm glad." And then, almost like she wasn't sure she was going to do it until she did, she reached out and took my hand. Not dramatically, not with announcement, just quietly, her fingers folding around mine in the dim light of my apartment, with the radiator clicking and the wind outside. I looked at her, she was already looking at me. "I don't want to assume anything," she said carefully, "and I don't want to make things strange between us, but I think about you a lot, Ava, more than I've thought about someone in a really long time, and I didn't want to keep not saying it." My heart was beating so hard I was certain she could hear it. "I think about you too," I said. My voice came out barely above a whisper. Something in her face softened, not with relief exactly, but with something that looked like recognition. Like a question she'd been carrying for months had just been answered. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah," I said. She smiled then, that full, warm, unguarded smile, and in the quiet of my little apartment on Fremont Street with the December wind pressing against the old windows, she leaned toward me slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull back, and she kissed me. It was soft and unhurried, and it tasted like popcorn, and felt like every door I had ever been afraid to open finally swinging wide. We were careful with each other in the beginning, not cautious in a fearful way, more like deliberate. like we both understood that what we were building was something real and worth protecting, and we didn't want to rush it into fragility. We kept having our Friday dinners and our Wednesday painting classes, but now she held my hand across the table, and now I stayed until morning sometimes, and now the space between our apartments felt different, not smaller exactly, but warmer, more alive. She told me about her last relationship, a woman named Priya she had dated for 3 years, who had eventually moved to New York for work, and whose departure had quietly broken something in Jordan that had taken a long time to repair. She told me this one evening sitting on her studio floor surrounded by half-finished canvases, and I listened the way she had always listened to me, fully, without rushing to fill the silence. I think I stopped trusting my own feelings for a while after that, she said, like I convinced myself I was probably reading things wrong, that what I felt wasn't really what I felt. I know exactly what that's like, I said. She looked at me. I know you do. We understood each other in ways that were hard to explain to people who hadn't lived them. We had both spent years being something other than ourselves for the comfort of the people around us. We had both paid a price for that. We were both, in our different ways, still learning what it felt like to simply be. That shared understanding made us gentle with each other in a way I had never experienced before. There was no performance between us, no version of myself that I had to maintain. I could be tired or scared or uncertain or ridiculous, and she received all of it with the same steady warmth that she brought to everything. In February, she painted something new. She didn't show it to me until it was finished. She had a rule about not showing work in progress, which I respected even when it drove me a little crazy. When she finally turned it around in her studio one afternoon, I stood very still for a long moment. It was abstract the way all her work was abstract, shapes and color and movement rather than literal representation. But it was unmistakably about light coming through windows, about something opening, about the particular quality of illumination that happens when you let something in that you've been keeping out. It's called Fremont Street in October, she said quietly. It's about the day I met you. I pressed my hand against my mouth because I didn't trust myself to speak without crying. She stood there holding the painting and watching me with that calm, attentive patience that was so entirely her. Jordan, I finally managed. I know, she said simply. Spring came to Portland the way it always does, reluctantly, and then all at once, the grey giving way to cherry blossoms practically overnight, and the streets filling with people who had been waiting for warmth the way the earth waits for rain. My mother called me in March. We had been talking more by then, carefully, slowly, the way you relearn something you thought you knew. She asked how Portland was. I told her it was beautiful. She asked if I was eating well. I said yes. There was a pause, and then she asked, in a voice that was trying very hard, "Are you happy, Mija?" And I thought about Jordan's question on that December night, about what I had said, about moving toward happy. "Yes, Mama," I said, "I actually am." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Good, that's all I wanted." We were not there yet, my mother and I. We were still navigating, still finding language, still learning how to love each other across the distance of everything that had changed. But that phone call felt like a beginning, like the first warm day after a long winter. I told Jordan about it that evening. We were walking along the river, the water catching the late afternoon light, the cherry trees along the bank in full impossible bloom. She listened, and when I finished she put her arm around me and pulled me into her side, and we walked like that for a while without talking. "You know what I love about you," she said eventually. "Tell me," I said. "The way you keep showing up," she said. "For yourself, for the people you love, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." I looked at her. She was watching the river, her profile lit gold by the late sun, paint under her fingernails the way it always was, that quiet strength in her face that I had learned to read the way you learn to read something you love. "I love you," I said. It was the first time I had said it. The words came out without planning, without ceremony, just true, the way simple things are true. She stopped walking. She turned and looked at me, and the smile that moved across her face was slow and warm and completely unhidden, the truest smile I had ever seen on another human being. "I love you too, Ava," she said. "I have for a while." We stood there on the riverbank in the cherry blossom light, with the water moving past us and Portland all around us. And I thought about that woman in the Walmart parking lot in Tulsa, saying the truth out loud to a windshield for the first time and being terrified. I thought about the stone I had carried in my chest for 34 years. I thought about a rolling suitcase and a one-way ticket and a desperate, fragile hope. And I understood, standing there with Jordan's hand in mine and the whole long, beautiful spring ahead of us, that hope had not been wrong. That the life I had imagined for myself, the real one, the honest one, the one where I was fully and completely Ava, had been waiting for me, not somewhere impossible, not in some other version of reality. Right here, on a street in Portland, across a hallway, in a pair of paint-stained overalls and a coffee mug, and a voice that said, "Do you need help with those?" to a stranger who had never needed anything more in her life. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be found. I had spent mine learning to find myself. And it turned out that was exactly enough, because once I finally, fully became who I had always been, love found me too. Not despite everything I had survived. Because of it.